All right. So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to part 3 of this presentation, integrating soccer fitness into your practices. And Tony and I have been running this for 3 weeks in a row now. So this is the 3rd week, and this is the final week. So hope you enjoy it. We're gonna talk today about strength and power. And I see Mayor has already let us know. We've opened the chat for everyone, and there's a nice message here about Uruguay winning the under-20 men's World Cup, and they played Italy in the final. So I was more or less, it doesn't matter to me who wins that, because my background is Italian, but Uruguay is like my second home. So congratulations for Uruguay, and hopefully we'll learn a little bit about how to train for strength and power, so your teams can play just like they do. So, all right. So
yeah, Richard. Yeah. So listen, I I'm looking forward to this one. I mean, I look forward to everything you do and everything you say, but I'm looking forward to this one because, at least from what I understand, unlike aerobic training and anaerobic training, strength training is a little bit more, should I say, scientific. It has to be planned correctly, and not that the other ones shouldn't. Mm-hmm. But when you talk about strength training, there's a specific way of doing it, right?
Right.
There is a right way and there is a wrong way. I think with aerobic and anaerobic, sometimes you can, inadvertently mix the two of them together, but there is no harm done in the short run. You know what I'm saying? But with strength training, you got to be more precise. You got to be more aware of what you're doing, and so I'm curious to learn a lot more about strength training and power training as well, because you're going to touch on that as well. I mean, the two of them are connected. Endurance. I think it's also an outcome of strength training and all of that. So, Richard, I'm going to throw it to you, and I'm looking forward to this one.
For sure, absolutely. Thanks, Tony. And you make a good point that the energy systems that we talked about the last few weeks. First of all, there are certain guidelines and protocols and timing and intensity and all that. But as we mentioned, right, they do kind of tie in together. And the reality is that the sport doesn't involve one energy system and then another one and then another. The sport involves all three at the same time. You just shift in, from every few seconds in terms of which system is dominant. So at one point, the aerobic system might be 80% dominant, and at another point, it switches down to 50 or 60 or whatever. So that's the idea. Strength, power, yes, these are two unique components of physical ability. They require unique methods of training. In the context of the course, and I just want to be clear about this course, and even my more detailed soccer fitness trainers course, which is where this content comes from, I just think it's important for everyone that's watching to keep in mind. In the context of the course, really what I'm focusing on is teaching coaches how to incorporate strength and power into their practices, not necessarily, how to go to a gym and train with weights and other things. Not to say that training in a gym is bad. It's actually a very effective method of building strength and power. But of course, we're working in an environment here with kids, with youth players, where we have limited time with them as a group on the field, and we want to try to maximize and make the most out of that time. So these are just some ways within a short amount of time after a warm-up, or even towards the end of a training session, or there's many ways to do it, but these are, we're going to look at examples of ways that strength and power can be built in a practice, and just let's keep that in mind when you see a lot of the exercises, because I have lots of even demonstrations and videos of exercises that are all done on the field. So keep that in mind, and of course, please feel free to ask questions whenever you want in the chat or the Q&A. The chat is open. All right, so the outline today, okay, we're talking about strength and power. This is part 3 of our 3-part course. And of course, we need to start by defining our terms. What is strength? So this is a good definition, I think, a good kind of dictionary definition, if we can call it that. The maximum amount of force that a muscle or group of muscles can exert against some form of resistance in a single effort. So when we talk about one person being stronger than another, or one athlete being stronger than another, in an absolute sense, that means that the athlete can exert more force in a single effort than another athlete. This can be measured. This can be measured with equipment. This can be measured with weights. If if Tony and I go to do bench press and he can bench press 300 pounds and I can only bench press 250, right? So Tony is stronger than me because he's exerting more force in one effort, and that's the way it's measured and it's tested. And of course, we have to understand that in soccer, you're not in a weight room, you're not lifting weights, but you're certainly working against resistance. And so strength manifests, or we see it in all of the movements that are done in soccer. And this is just a simple summary: running, jumping, and kicking. What do you do in soccer physically? Well, that's what you do. You run, you jump, and you kick. And within running, of course, there's accelerating, decelerating, turning, jumping. There's jumping off 2 feet, jumping off 1 foot. There's the goalkeeper jumps, dives, and and kicking is everything from passing to striking to bending the ball, all those things. So we need strength. Muscles need strength for all of those movements. And one thing to keep in mind, I've italicized and bolded the text here, just to be clear, that training for strength, in order to improve strength, there must be heavy resistance or high resistance. We'll get into, there's some principles of training. The key one that we're kind of, hinting at here is something called the principle of overload. That's important to keep in mind. Muscles don't get stronger unless they work and train against heavy or high resistance. It can be done on a field, but it requires some type of resistance. So that's strength. And now power. Okay, this is probably the simplest way I can define it. It's the ability to produce force in a given amount of time. And typically when we say in a given amount of time, we're talking about in a short amount of time. I'm not going to put anyone on the spot, but in physics, like the actual equation for power is, maybe I'll draw it here. I'm going to ask anyone, and it's not, I'm sure Tony knows this, but okay, you can see on the screen here. So the F is force, and it's multiplied by what?
Well, Richard, in electronics, because I used to teach computer electronics, power, it's I squared times I.
Okay.
Is it I squared? No, it's E squared, E times I. Yeah, I think it's E times I. Okay, never mind.
Well, you're on the right track here.
We're on the right track.
We're speaking just physics and the equations of motion here. So we know that for power we need force, but there's one key component, and I'm going to underline here. Okay, in a given amount of time or in a short amount of time. So anyone in the chat knows this? Who's in the chat here? Delta T. Whoa, delta T is the change in time. Not really. Well, you know what? Yeah, I guess we can say delta T. Yeah, you got it. In other words, delta T is velocity. Change in position over change in time. So it's force times velocity. All kinds of things coming out of that chat. Mass times acceleration. That's the formula for force. Come on, guys. Power equals force times velocity. Now, what does this mean in soccer terms? It means you need to apply force quickly to produce power. Okay? Strength can involve the application of force, even if the application of force is done slowly. And one maybe good, oh yeah, and Kais also answered speed. You're right. Okay, force times velocity. So a good way to visualize strength is to think of the sport of powerlifting. I mentioned bench press. Powerlifting involves 3 key exercises: a bench press, a squat, and a deadlift. And if you ever watch the lifters that do those lifts, and you think about how fast do they move the bar up and down? Do they move really fast, Tony, or do they move kind of a little bit slower and more?
Well, it depends.
It depends, but they don't really move too fast. If you're talking about a heavy squat with hundreds of pounds on the bar, they kind of have to move slowly. It may take them several seconds to get up, right? And the reason is that force or strength in an absolute sense tends to be highest when the velocity or the movement is a bit slower. Okay.
But there's also a particular strength training where you use lower weights but faster repetition, right?
Yeah, but then you're talking about power training. So we want to focus on force and strength first. So the basic idea is with strength, the velocity of the movements, if we're training for strength, the velocity of the movements have to be a little bit lower. Okay, and again, maybe just a little more physics here, and I'll just draw it out here, and hopefully this makes sense to everyone. There's this awesome concept in biomechanics called the force velocity curve. That's what it looks like. And the basic idea here, it's not a straight line, it's a curve, but the basic idea here is that the highest forces tend to occur at lower velocities. So the question I was asking Tony, if you think about if someone is going to squat for their maximal effort, like if it might be 300 pounds, it might be 250 pounds, whatever, they can't do it that fast. It's going to take quite a long time. They have to recruit almost all their muscle fibers. It's going to happen slower. Okay? And the very, very high velocity movements, perhaps the fastest one that exists in soccer is striking a ball, involve almost no resistance at all. So the forces are very low. When you're striking a ball, the only resistance that exists is the resistance in the air as the leg moves and whatever the weight of the ball is, which is really quite light, right? Even running might happen here on the curve. There's very minimal resistance with running, but there are forces that are being produced into the ground, and you have to overcome the friction on the ground, etc. So in any case, I hope this wasn't too complicated, but the basic idea here is that when we're talking about strength, we have to think about training for strength with movements that are a little bit slower and with resistance that is high. Right. When we're talking about power, we kind of want to be in the middle. So we want forces that are still high, but maybe not maximal. And you said it, Tony, the speed has to be faster, right?
Has to be fast. Yes.
Okay, you cannot train for power without a high velocity. And you cannot train for strength without a heavy resistance and a relatively low velocity. So that's the physics lesson for today. I promise there will be no more physics here, but we have to just think about it. Now, just like with strength, power, of course, is involved in all of these movements. When you're running, especially when you're running fast, there's force applied at a high velocity. So there's power. Jumping is all a powerful movement. The greater the power, the higher the jump. And kicking and striking, of course, these are technical movements, but they involve power too. So just like strength is involved in all soccer movements, so is power. Okay, and finally, I've reiterated it here. Training, this should say power, guys. I'm sorry, there's a typo there. Sorry about that. Training for power must involve muscles working against heavy resistance quickly. So the velocity is important. Okay. So with those terms and those definitions out of the way, now I want to just touch on a couple of key principles here. Okay. So the first one is the principle of overload. And I just let's look at the picture for a minute here. And, what do you think, Tony? Who's being overloaded in this picture?
Oh, the big guy.
Yeah. Unfortunately not, right? It's too easy for him. It's the other one, okay?
Right.
Where the muscles are working against a high level of resistance, and perhaps we can assume this is a level of resistance that this guy's not used to working against. So it has to be within reason. And really to learn about load and about how much load to use and all that, well, then we have to talk about periodization. And, you guys have to take my course and we'll learn all about that, including how to calculate it, including how to do it without technology. It can be done literally for free without any investment in technology. Okay, but the basic idea, again, within reason, is that muscles only adapt, only get stronger when they're presented with overload. And that's why, I made the point about heavy resistance. This is important because, I was actually talking to someone the other day about this, that most people, when they go to the gym, they might lift weights, but they don't really lift heavy weights. And then they say, oh, well, I've been going to the gym for 3 years and I'm not getting any results. And when I hear that, I think, well, you're probably not overloading enough. And again, it has to be within reason, because if you try to lift something that's really too heavy, you might get hurt, but you have to overload. So this is the principle, and there's a lot of text here. So let's just be clear on it, right? It's not that complicated when you think about it this way. In order to keep making gains from an exercise program, athletes must find some way to make the exercise more difficult. That's what overload is. It means that it has to be more difficult. The body adapts to a given load. And once the body has adapted to a given load, it will not continue to adapt or further adapt unless the load is increased. In simple terms, let's just say that you have young athletes and you're making them do push-ups to improve their upper body strength. And the most push-ups that they can do for a number of sets might be 10. Okay, that's the most they can do. Now, if you start doing those exercises 2 or 3 days a week, within a few weeks, within 3 or 4 weeks, they're going to adapt. They're going to get stronger. What happens then, Tony, if you keep doing 3 sets of 10 push-ups for 3 more months? Are they going to continue to adapt?
No, they're not.
You have to add it. You have to go up to 15 push-ups, right? You have to find some way to increase the overload. And it's not that difficult of a concept to understand, but if we don't start to apply that to our training, then what happens is we don't see any improvements. And before we blame, the training and say, well, it doesn't work. No, it does work if you get the overload right. And sometimes it's a little more complicated than just adding 5 push-ups, because again, you may have to add resistance. You have to watch the timing and all of that. And we'll talk about some of those details, but this is very important to understand. And by the way, this principle doesn't just apply to strength or power. This principle applies to the aerobic system, to the anaerobic system, all the stuff we talked about. Okay, and I think we even gave some examples last week and the week before about how you can make small changes to the intensity or the volume of training from one week to the next, or but the idea is always to progressively overload. So that's very important. And then just another principle here, okay, which is the principle of specificity. And I like the bullseye as a visual here. So specificity, okay, essentially the idea is that the sports training should be relevant and appropriate to the sport, because we adapt in a specific way to the specific demands that are presented to us. Okay, simple examples, and we're going a little bit outside of the scope of strength training, but imagine, Tony, if you have soccer players and you train them on an exercise bike, a exercise bicycle 3 days a week. Are they going to make specific adaptations to the movements that they have to do in soccer on the bike?
No, not in the long run.
No. Their heart will get stronger, right? Their legs will get stronger. So it's not useless, but it's not as specific to running. Yeah. And remember, even last week and the week before, we kind of talked about that continuum with specificity and predictability. Well, what's the most specific way to train for soccer?
Run. And
even more than that, it's playing soccer, right?
Yeah.
So running is more specific.
Non-linear, yeah, non-linear.
Right. Yeah. So running is more specific than cycling, and soccer is more specific than running. And if we think about this in the context of strength training, well, believe it or not, and I'm going to show just some examples and kind of, hopefully you guys see what I'm getting at here. But there's definitely a benefit to the more predictable and less specific type of strength training.
Richard, okay. I have a question for you.
Of course, yeah.
So what is functional strength training? Is it related to what you just mentioned now, specificity?
Right. Yeah. So I think so. Like, so that word functional, it's an interesting word, because it's sort of, based on just the definition of the word, essentially it just means that does the training have a function? And of course, any training has a function. But I think the way it's used, I would almost, it's like a euphemism for specific.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, when we hear functional strength, maybe we can think specific strength, and maybe that's a better way to think of it. So the way I would define functional or specific strength for soccer is, I would say that the movements, the resistance look as close to soccer as possible. Okay, what's the resistance in soccer? It's usually an opponent, right? It's usually one player pushing with their shoulder or whatever against another player challenging for a ball. That's probably the most specific application of strength in soccer. And then, of course, you have the running and the jumping together. So basically, the idea is that functional or specific training, which is away on the continuum, it's away from predictability and it's more towards specificity. It would be involving movements and resistance and everything that are as specific to the game as possible. And here, I'm going to show some examples in the video of exercises that are more on the specific side for both strength and power, and exercises that are all the way on the predictable side. And again, especially when we talk about strength and power, I mean, just as an example, you know, there are no professional or national level soccer players anywhere in the world that don't lift weights. Like it's just not, you know, maybe 20, 30 years ago, you could say that there were, but these days, every top level club or national team, they have a strength and conditioning coach. They have people that know what they're doing, and they're in the weight room. How much time they spend, what they do, you know, there's lots of differences and things, but really, you know, why is it that everybody does strength training in the weight room? The main reason is because the weight room and weight training exercises allow for a very predictable type of exercise. You can easily train any muscle in the body by adding resistance. And when you have adapted to a particular resistance in the weight room, it's very easy to overload. All you do is add another 5 or 10 pounds. So it's very predictable. It's not really, you know, specific or functional to soccer, but it's necessary because of the overload. And that's something to keep in mind. Again, this is a complicated topic. I was telling Tony before we went live here that in my course, we have 4 lessons that are each about 90 minutes, all about this stuff. 2 in the classroom, 2 on the field. So this is, you know, about an hour where we're talking about everything together. So we're kind of rushing a little bit, but you know, I hope that answers the question, Tony, that specific.
Yeah, and Richard, and I have another question for you. And I know, you know, I hope, you know, forgive me if I ask too many.
No problem. No, of course.
So we talked about the aerobic system, right?
Yeah.
So the aerobic system would be the base for developing the other systems, right?
Right.
You know, the anaerobic system. Strength training, would that be the base for developing power, for developing speed, for developing muscular endurance as well, right? So having a strong base, strength base, will help you develop the other you know, requirements that you need for soccer, which is power, endurance, and speed. Am I right or am I wrong?
You are right. And again, I'm sorry, guys, but I'm going back to physics here.
Okay.
So, but this is the last time, I promise. Okay. So first of all, you're asking me about the base, like strength being the base for
power,
and for eventually even for speed. So you're absolutely correct. And to really understand this stuff, and sorry for the writing, guys, I'm drawing on the mouse here, but force equals mass times acceleration. This is another equation of motion. Okay. So what that means in an absolute sense is that athletes who have a given mass, okay, in order for them to, let's say, raise the level of force that they produce, then there is at some point going to be a requirement to increase acceleration, because they can't just get heavier. I mean, they can gain weight maybe, but you know, and acceleration is a change in velocity over a change in time. So the basic idea here is that because acceleration is a component of force, and acceleration involves an increase in velocity or a change in velocity over a change in time, then yes, we absolutely can say that force is related to velocity. And what that means in terms of training And you know what you said, Tony, strength or force is the foundation of speed. If an athlete can improve their force production, meaning they make their legs stronger, they can produce more force into the ground, which can then propel them forward more and allow them to run faster.
Yep.
So this,
Yep.
the science is very clear on this. We know this. First of all, that if you take athletes and you do a well-designed strength training program, they actually end up running faster. And we also know this by looking at the fastest athletes in the world, who are the sprinters. And this is something that I always will challenge anyone to, like, if you really want to learn about running and you know how to get better at it, just go on YouTube. Like we have, you know, we're in the internet age now. We can learn whatever we want. Go on YouTube and just type 100-meter finals, men's, women's, whatever, and watch the race, and you know, watch how they run, and you know, of course, you can see those are the best runners in the world, and you know, they're very good at producing force. And then if you start to look into these sprinters, who are the fastest athletes in the world, and then you look at how strong they are, believe it or not, pound for pound, okay, they're also the strongest athletes in the world. Most high-level sprinters can squat at least 2.5 times and often up to 3 times their body weight. So even if they weigh only 160 or 170 or whatever, they can squat 2.5 to 3 times that. And almost all of them can, the men anyway, can bench press 2 times their body weight. So pound for pound, you know, they're the strongest athletes in the world. And it makes sense because you have to be very strong, right, to produce those forces. Of course, because as you said, Tony, force or strength is the foundation of speed. Now, is force or strength the foundation of power? Well, in this case, it's even easier to understand, because what's the equation for power? It's force times velocity. So force is included in the equation for power. So if, you know, okay, like to test power, one of the easiest tests that's done is a vertical jump test. And it's a very good, I mean, it actually is a good predictor of the level of sport that you're going to play at in almost every sport, meaning the athletes that are at the top professional level in soccer. I just did a presentation on this last week at a big conference in Portugal. So in soccer, in hockey, in baseball, in basketball, in almost all sports, the athletes that get to the top level, one of the things that differentiates them is that they have a higher vertical jump. They have more power in their legs. Okay. So again, like with force, with power, we know that being able to jump higher, right, being able to produce more power is an advantage in terms of the level of play you're going to get to. And of course, force is one of the components of power. So when we go and we apply that back to what your question was, which is force or is strength the foundation for speed and for power? Yes. Without the ability to apply a high level of force, you don't run as fast as you can, and you don't jump as high as you can. So, yeah, I hope that makes sense.
It does. It does. It
Good.
does.
Yeah. And yeah, I'll please, you know, I'll erase this now, and I promise this time no more equations. But this is the idea, right? Is you know, hopefully it helps to understand a little bit. And again, this is rest in peace, Charles Poliquin. He passed away a few years ago, and he's a real famous strength and conditioning coach. He's from Australia and worked with top athletes, sprinters, track and field, rugby, all kinds of different athletes there, and eventually came to the United States. And he's got these courses that he teaches. Oh, I mean, doesn't teach them anymore, but these courses that he developed and his own certification methodology and all that. And I think he gave a good quote here about specificity just before we move on, which is that it's developing a particular athletic quality in the manner in which it occurs in a particular sport. So I think that's maybe a good way to think about. And we'll show some examples. Okay, again, there's a continuum with predictability and specificity. And no matter what, if you want predictability, you got to go in the weight room and you have to squat and deadlift and you know, do chin-ups and do. I mean, then you can count the number of repetitions, you can count the weight, you can quantify, you can even measure the speed of the movement. I mean, it's very easy to predict what's happening. Okay. When you're getting into specificity, you lose a little bit the ability to predict. There's nothing you can do about it. They're not one better than the other. They're both important, but we have to keep those principles in mind. Okay, I don't know if anyone else has questions. I know Tony and I have talked a little bit, but please feel free in the chat. I see one Q&A, but no, that was just Cass or Kais rather, sorry, answering the question about force times velocity. So Cass did a good job with that. So we move on here. Okay, of course we understand from the last few lectures that we did that there are three energy systems at play in soccer: the anaerobic alactic system, the anaerobic lactic system, and the aerobic system. And really, when we're talking about strength and power and how they manifest, how they look in the game, well, it's the alactic system that's responsible for energy production for anything in the game that involves strength or power. Again, I mentioned challenging for a ball. Those challenges don't happen over the course of 30 seconds. Those challenges happen, half a second, maybe if there's a shielding or something going on. You see this at the end of the game. There's a great clip of Haaland doing it. I can't remember, one of the Champions League knockout games, and he just steps on the ball, and he's so strong and good at shielding that he can hold off another player for 5 seconds. Then as soon as the player wins position on him, he just kicks it off his leg and wins a corner. So anyway, it can happen for longer than 1 second, but it's short duration, and of course the intensity is high. The other two systems we talked about help primarily with sustaining the high intensity action or recovering. Okay, Yuichi is asking about treating muscle aches. We'll get to that in a minute because now we're talking about recovery, but we'll stick to the script here. So the activity pattern in soccer, right? We know it. It's sprint, rest, sprint. Strength and power are involved primarily in the sprint components of that activity pattern. And there is recovery that is required in between the sprint components, which allows you to keep going and to continue to perform them. And remember, okay, and I guess I'll ask Tony, what happens if a player's aerobic system is really poor? They have poor aerobic fitness. Are they going to be able to recover and still maintain a high level of power or strength?
Absolutely not.
No.
No,
Right?
no. They will not recover as fast as they should, or as fast as you want them. And of course, if you're not recovered, if you don't have oxygen, you can't do nothing. No strength, no power, no.
Right. So
zero.
you lose strength, you lose power, and you lose speed if your aerobic system isn't good as the game progresses. And I'll tell you just an anecdote that came up like literally yesterday. I'm working right now. There's a player that he originally lived in Toronto, but eventually moved to Portugal to go play with a pro academy there. He's still young, but he kind of goes back and forth, and he came back to train with us this summer. And his parents have said that the coaches told him that like everything is going well, but he lacks a little bit of speed. That's what the coaches said, right? And so the first thing I do is I test him, because that's for me, that's fine. I hear what the coaches are saying, but I need to know, I need to measure it. And it turns out that when we measured speed and power, so that the jump height, the sprint test, the stuff that we always look at in terms of physical ability, well, it turns out that this particular player actually is really above average in those abilities. He had a very good jump, vertical jump, and a pretty fast sprint as well. But then we tested his yo-yo test, which is really a measure of endurance and recovery. And when we looked at the yo-yo test, what we found was that it was actually very, very low, like very poor compared to kind of the higher level standards for his age. And so, I look at that and I say, well, okay, it may look like he's slower in the game, but I think the reason it looks that way is because they're watching him over the course of a whole game. And when he gets tired, now all of a sudden he can't run as fast anymore. And that's something that's very important to keep in mind, is that it's, of course, strength, power, force production, all those things, those are what are responsible for the performance of these movements. But it's the aerobic system that's responsible for the recovery. So keep that in mind. We're not here to talk about aerobic training, but we can't forget it, because without the recovery, then the subsequent movements are not as strong and not as powerful. So let's go into some of the details about strength here. Okay, what do we need to think about? Well, You can use body weight as resistance, or you can use external resistance like weights or bands or whatever, but we need resistance in order to build strength. My suggestions, and again, this is based on what can be done in or after a practice on the field. This is not necessarily a replacement to weight training or anything. This is a supplement, okay? 4 to 6 exercises. And the exercises, whatever exercises they are, I talked about push-ups, we talked about squats, whatever, I'll show a few examples, but it has to be challenging to perform 8 to 10 repetitions in one set. What does that mean? That means if you have someone who's really strong and they can do 30 or 40 or 50 push-ups, then that level of resistance for that exercise for that athlete isn't enough to produce overload. Okay. So this is important. We're talking about this concept of resistance and how challenging the resistance needs to be. So I'll show some examples, but if, as an example, push-ups, right? If that exercise, just to do them normally up and down, 1 second up, 1 second down, whatever, if that is so easy for an athlete that they can do 15, 20, 30, whatever, and you'll see this, right? If you work with athletes, eventually they will get to the point where they can do that. Then it's not going to work to overload the muscles if they're doing an exercise that they can do 30, 40 times. So something needs to be done to the push-up to make it harder. And there's hundreds of things you can do. I'm going to show one example, which is a slow push-up, where you go much, much slower on the way down. Okay? You can actually add resistance, and lots of athletes will do this. They'll put a weight or a weight plate or something on their back. Okay? There are ways to do push-ups with different grips, hands closer together, hands farther apart, hands over the head. You know, there's, as I said, literally dozens, if not maybe even hundreds of ways to make it more challenging, but it has to be made more challenging to the point where it is a challenge to perform 8 to 10 repetitions. That's the only way that we get overload. And remember, if we go back to the principle of overload, we have to keep in mind, without overload, muscles won't adapt. They won't get stronger. So keep that in mind. Okay, now we have these terms: concentric, eccentric, and isotonic movements or muscle actions. So what do they mean? And again, it's a short lesson course here. It's just an hour. So we can't spend forever talking about these. But basically, a concentric movement or a concentric action in a muscle is where a muscle is under tension while it is shortening, while the length is decreasing. Maybe, I don't know if people can see me here, but, let's just say I was doing a bicep curl. Okay. If I'm holding a weight and the bicep muscle, as I lift it, the muscle is under tension while it's shortening, while the length is decreasing. That's a concentric action. Okay. Now, an eccentric action, again, I'm still on camera here, so I can do the same thing. So if I'm holding the weight and then I'm lowering the weight, but kind of going slow with it, now the muscle is under tension, but the muscle is under tension while it's lengthening. That's an eccentric action. And finally, well, we'll stay here. Finally, an isotonic action. Imagine I was just holding the weight and not moving, just holding it there. Now the muscle is under tension, but there's no change in length. So basically, okay, camera's now back on my head. Okay, basically, a good strength training program should include all three of these types of movements. Concentric, where the muscle is under tension while the length decreases. Eccentric, where the muscle is under tension while the length of the muscle increases. And isotonic, where the muscle is under tension with no change in length. So we'll show some examples of this, and I may even ask, the audience, and if not, I'll probably just bug Tony again to, when we see these videos that are coming up, you tell me what type of action it is, okay? So hope that makes sense. I'm suggesting here 3 to 4 sets and a rest period of 1 to 1.5 minutes in between each set. So that means, as a simple rule, let's say you wanted to do squats as an exercise. Well, you do 8 to 10 repetitions of squats. You rest for 1 to 1.5 minutes, and then you do it again, and you do it 3 or 4 times. That's the basic idea. But remember, If you have an athlete that is strong enough that he or she could do 50 squats without weight, well, what do you need to do? You have to add a weight, or you have to add some type of resistance, or you need to make the exercise more challenging. If you don't, if they're doing 50 or whatever squats, there's going to be a tiny increase in strength, but really there won't be any overload. So there won't be any real significant increase in strength. And that's what happens sometimes when the loading is not done properly. Okay. So now we're going to look at power. And again, I'm still suggesting body weight or external resistance. And again, I'm going to show some videos of examples that are just done on a field. So no weights at all. None of the stuff I'm showing here has weights. Okay. Doesn't mean you don't have to use them. Just means sometimes it may not be practical on the field, and we're showing it that way. Okay. Make sure that the exercises are performed at a high velocity. Why, Tony? Why am I stressing high velocity for power?
Well, because you want to get your muscle used to fast movements, right? You know, when you have speed, of course, you want to go as fast as you can. Yeah. So by doing at high velocity, you are teaching your muscles, right? Right. To move quicker under stress. Is that
under load? Yeah. So remember the equation of motion for power. Power is force times velocity. So the only way to improve power is to work at a heavy resistance, but fast. And
as fast as you can.
Yeah, and maybe a good visual for that, because we talked about powerlifting and the squat, the bench press. Now let's switch gears. Think about Olympic weightlifting. So in the Olympics, they have these weightlifting exercises, which are the clean and jerk and the snatch. These are these two lifts. That clean and jerk is where you pick up a weight from the floor, you clean it, and it goes to your collarbone basically, and then you do a jerk, which is an overhead press, and they have to stay balanced and hold it for a certain amount of time and technique and all that. And then the snatch lift is even really interesting, which is where you actually pick up a barbell from the floor and it goes all the way up to over the head in one lift. It's a real difficult lift to do. But in any case, think about the velocity of those movements or the speed of those movements. And if no one else wants to answer, I'll just ask Tony, and compare the velocity of those Olympic lifts. How fast is the bar moving, right? Versus the squat or the deadlift in a powerlifting. Which one has a higher velocity, the Olympic lifts or the squat, the deadlift, power lifts? Which one?
Oh, you got me on this one, Richard. I can't picture it.
Can't picture it, right? So
can't picture it.
Anybody else? I don't want to just give it away. Maybe next time I do this, I'll find another video of an Olympic lift. But if you think about it, in an Olympic lift, very quickly, the bar is coming from the ground up very quickly. And then even quicker than that, it's actually being pressed in the jerk or the overhead press up over the head. So those movements are done at a very high velocity. And so the power from those movements, and remember, power is force multiplied by velocity, the power of those movements tends to be much higher than it is for a squat or a deadlift where the movement is much slower. The absolute amount of force in a maximal squat or deadlift is more than it is for an Olympic lift. And that's why, we actually looked at this in my facility the other day just for fun, because we were trying to figure out what are the world records for squats and bench press. And so the world record for a squat, it's over 1,000 pounds.
Wow.
Okay, now that, don't try that at home. Please, anybody, but we're talking, the movement is very slow. There's nobody that's ever going to be able to do a clean and jerk with 1,000 pounds, because you can't move that much weight quickly. Does that make sense? So the clean and jerk is the forces and the load that's used, it's very heavy, it's not light, because power does require a high amount of force, but it also requires a high amount of speed. So in the end, there's that trade-off if we go back to that force velocity curve. So in any case, when we're talking about power, like the key is that the resistance should be high, but there needs to be also a high velocity of movement. Without a high velocity, there is no way to improve power. Okay. Here's something, and I know Tony and I chatted about this offline before about plyometrics. So again, we don't have a lot of time to talk about it today, but plyometric exercise essentially is about repeated jumping or bounding movements where the focus is on landing quickly between one jump and the next. Now, why is that? Why is a quick landing so important for plyometrics and so important for developing power based on what we know about power? What do you think, Tony?
Well, it's all about shortening and lengthening the muscles, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
So if you think about, power requiring force and velocity, okay, when you land from a jump, all of the muscles, when you land, they're actually stretching.
Right.
Immediately on the landing. The knees bend, the ankles bend. So there's a stretch happening in the calf muscles in the lower leg and in the powerful muscles in the thigh. And if that stretch happens quicker, what happens to the resulting shortening or the contraction? It happens also quicker.
Yep.
Right? So a quicker landing and a quicker stretch results in a quicker and therefore a more powerful jump. And if you've ever played soccer and jumped up from a ball, and maybe I can even stand up to show this a little bit, but imagine the difference between trying to jump where you go down really slow and then come up, or just jumping where you go down fast and come up. Which type of jump would result in a higher jump height? The one where you go down slowly and then come up, or the one where you go fast?
Fast.
Of course, everyone knows that. I mean, we don't need to study physics to, you can just watch the sport and just watch any player before they jump. The last step that they take, which is either off one leg or two, you're going to notice that the knees bend and the hips, they bend and they contract very quickly. Why? Because that's the only way to produce power and get off the ground. Watch the goalkeepers when they dive or challenge for the ball. And this is the thing. If you want to become good at this as a coach, you have to watch, the movements, right? If you don't do that, then you won't learn it, right? So, okay. I do see a question from Dave. Is the physiological scientific reason that really heavy weights cannot be lifted quickly due to the time that it takes to recruit different muscle fibers? Yes, Dave, that's a big part of it. Okay, so and just to be clear about the question that Dave has asked, it's a great question, right? Okay, in order to move a very heavy weight or a maximal weight, what we really need to do is we need to recruit as many muscle fibers as possible. And this is, there's lots of literature on this where they've done studies of the muscle activation or whatever. When we're working maximally, we're using almost all of the muscle fibers that we have, and that's the only way that you can lift the weight, right? So because you need to recruit all those muscles, it does take more time, and of course you're also recruiting some of the muscles that are not necessarily able to contract at high velocities anyway. So it's yes, Dave, you're absolutely right. One of the reasons, right, that heavy weights cannot be lifted quickly is that it takes more time to recruit more muscles. So you're on the left side of the force velocity curve in that case. Okay, so we've got it. I'm suggesting 2 to 3 exercises. And again, it should be challenging to perform 4 to 6 repetitions. Maybe up to 8 repetitions. You don't need more than 8 repetitions for power exercises. If you do, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to exhaust the amount of creatine in the muscle. And when you do that, what happens is you move slower, you move less powerfully. So my suggestion is 2 to 3 exercises, 4 to 6 repetitions per set, and 3 to 4 sets per exercise. That's the idea. Okay, and there it is, 3 to 4 sets with a 1 to 1.5 minute of rest between each set. So, great questions, great discussion. I wanted to kind of, to finish the presentation with some examples of videos. And again, forgive me because these videos are not embedded in the presentation. So I'm going to stop share here and I'm going to go to each video one at a time and we'll share them and we'll have a look. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask either Tony or anyone else who's watching, okay, I'm going to just tell you the body part and whether it's a strength or a power exercise, right? I'm going to tell you that, but I'm not going to tell you whether it's a concentric, eccentric, or isotonic exercise. And I'm also not going to comment much on the specificity of it. So I want comments, and I want you to answer those questions for me. And again, it can't just be me quizzing Tony, because Tony
Hey, Lisa, you think that I know everything. I appreciate it, but I don't.
Maybe not, right? Yeah. So we have to get everyone else involved. So here we are, the first one. Okay, so I've got it on the screen, and we have to share it now. So here we go. So this is someone that you all know very well, and it's it's an upper body exercise. Okay, and I'm gonna go ahead and push play. Where's play here? No, where's the play button? Hold on. Sometimes the computer frustrates me because we can't access the things that we need to access here. The play button is being hidden by the buttons on Zoom. Sorry guys, just a sec here. Ah, there we go. Okay. So just watch it for a minute or half a minute, whatever. All right. Okay. So we've seen a couple of repetitions. Anyone, right? Does it look like a focus there on the concentric, eccentric, or isotonic type of movement? Right? We know it's an upper body exercise. We know it's a push-up, right? We can see that, right? Okay. Thomas, concentric. Okay, so there's a concentric part of it, which is when I'm pushing up. Because when I'm pushing up, okay, there, all the muscles in the upper body, the chest, the shoulders, they're all shortening. Okay, but I have to ask you, Thomas, what about this part? What's happening there? Okay. Yeah. Okay, Dave says all, right, if you're holding at the bottom. Okay, so the downward movement, okay, so Thomas, and we want to think about this, so because, and actually, in soccer, these types of actions, not as much in the upper body, they're very important in the lower body, but they're important in the upper body too. But these types of actions where you go very slow on the eccentric or the downward part, right, all the muscles in the chest and the shoulders at that point, they're actually lengthening. So they're under tension while they're lengthening. And so really this slow push-up, which is what we call this exercise, right? This slow push-up is training the muscles eccentrically. And I'm deliberately taking 5 seconds to get to the ground rather than just dropping down quickly. If you try it, you'll find that it's actually a lot harder to do than a normal push-up. Even if you have soccer players that are very strong performing regular push-ups, like they can do 30 or 40 all the way down. At some point you may have that if you're working with strong players. Try this, and maybe they'll only be able to do 6 to 10 of those, right? Okay. Thomas, okay, isotonic. Well, Dave, kind of made a point that if you hold at the bottom, then yeah, and I'm kind of holding a little bit at the bottom, then there's even a little bit of the isotonic component there too. But really, what this is it's a focus on the eccentric. I hope that makes sense. Does it make sense, Tony?
Yeah, well, it's lengthening, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the first one here. And again, just forgive me because I have to stop share again, and we're going to now go to the next one. Okay, so this is lower body. Oh, that's very loud. Okay, so we're going to make it less loud. Okay, all right. This is a real old one from a course, on-field training programs that we used to run back in my facility. This one's almost 15 years old. So I'm not in it, so you don't see what I look like 15 years ago, but actually there'll be an interesting shot, clip of me even older than that, almost 20 years ago. So let's have a look here. Okay, this is lower body strength. Okay, and I want you to just watch it for 30 seconds and let's see what's happening here, okay? All right, so hope everyone saw that. Tony, you saw it? You saw those kids on the field there on the sideline? Yeah? All right, so to the group. first of all, right? What type of action? Is it isometric? Is it concentric? Is it eccentric? Jeff says iso. Yeah, Thomas, iso. Yeah, you're right. It's isotonic. What are they doing? They're on, they're in a split stance. We call this a split squat. But rather than going up and down with it, they're going down into the movement with with the thigh parallel to the ground. And keep in mind, right, this is a team of players and different level of ability. But you can see the coach here, and I'll just say he's the son of one of our directors, Mladen. This is Mladen's son here. So he was a strength and conditioning coach with us for about 5-6 years, and he's got good form. You can see, right? The thigh is parallel. Okay, body nice and upright. Some of the athletes are doing it really well, some aren't, but we work in groups. But the muscles are under tension, and you can try this and you can see what it feels like. It's not something that's very easy to do, right? But the muscles are under tension while there's no change in length. So you guys are right, it's isotonic. You can see that they're just being asked to hold that movement for a certain duration of time. Okay, different way to train for strength, but also very important. Okay, if the muscles are strong in these held positions, there's actually a lot of good evidence to show that that's really effective to improve speed and power and all those things. So
Richard,
that's good. Yep.
Is a plank a type of isotonic exercise?
Absolutely.
Yep.
A plank is also an isotonic or an isometric type of exercise, which means that the muscles are being held in a certain position for a certain amount of time. Okay, Mayor, what do you think about the FIFA 11 Plus program? Okay, that's a great question. I've got even some videos where I discuss this in more detail. I think I'll give you a quick answer. The FIFA 11 Plus as something to do before you get on the field and start working with the ball, it's a pretty effective program as an injury prevention tool. Okay, now again, maybe I can say I'm biased because I'm an instructor and I went through all their training, and I like it. I like it as literally the first thing that players do before they touch a ball to be used as injury prevention. And of course, Mayor, you probably know, right, that some of these exercises are done in the program. They've got isometric exercises, they've got plyometrics, bounding, they've got strength exercises. So, they've recognized the importance of this. Now, it's not a training program, though. It's an injury prevention program. So it's done, yeah. Okay, Thomas, can I say simply, right? Okay, why are concentric, eccentric, and isometric all important? Okay, well, let's make it as simple as possible. Concentric actions are important to train because when we actually run, jump, and kick, the muscles do work concentrically. Every time you run, you push into the ground, and when you push into the ground, your hip, knee, ankle extends, you work concentrically. Every time you jump, there's a concentric action, and of course, every time you strike a ball or pass or do anything, you work concentrically. Eccentric, well, I can say the exact same thing. When you run, of course, you don't just run, but when your leg is in the air, then you have to land from the run, and when you land, there's an eccentric action. So there's a slight stretch in the muscles that extend the hip, knee, and ankle. Also, there's a lot of decelerating in soccer. Changes of direction, which we talked about last week, that happen every 3 to 5 seconds. So every deceleration, there's actually a very, very high eccentric load. And so if muscles are not trained to work eccentrically, then, the decelerations are not as good. The landing from jumps are not as good. By the way, back to the, the question from Mayor about FIFA 11. Okay. Injuries to the legs, specifically to the knee and specifically to the ACL, that horrible injury that requires a surgery and long recovery, that can happen a lot when decelerating or when landing from a jump. And so if the muscles are trained to be stronger eccentrically, then you can really do a lot to prevent injury. And finally, isometric. Well, there are isometric actions in the body too. Tony asked about a plank. Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the movements that we do in soccer, some muscles work eccentrically or concentrically, while others work isometrically. Think of what the core muscles have to do at the moment that you plant your foot before you strike the ball. The core muscles actually have to contract isometrically in order to keep you stable. Even when you're jumping or running, there's some movement in the torso and the pelvis, but a lot of it, the muscles are also contracting to maintain the body being more rigid. So I hope that answers your question, Thomas. Why are they all important? Why should we train them? Because in the soccer movements that we do, we use all three of those types of movements. Okay, so hope that makes sense. And we will move on to the next video. As I said, we go a little bit past 3 o'clock, but that's okay today because we have time. And Tony, I know you were asking me about planks, so I'm gonna share here, and you might see something familiar. Again, from the same on-field program. I think it would have been about, a good 13, 14 years ago. Can everyone see the screen now? Tony, you can see it?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, so here they are. Core strength. Okay, see, those are the coaches that are fooling around while the exercises are going. Fortunately, they don't pay attention as much as they should, but there it is. All right, so and the chat here, what do we have here? Oh, I can't see the chat now. Sorry, guys, my computer is going crazy with emails and everything. Thomas, again, great input. When shall we incorporate in training? I'll get to that in a sec, right? I just want to ask everybody, and Tony's got his hand up too. So what type of movement was that, Tony? That plank. Yeah. I'll put it back on the screen.
I would think it's an iso exercise, isn't it?
Isometric, right? They're just getting in position, and the muscles in the the oblique abdominal muscles on the side of the body where you're doing the plank, those muscles, and even some of the muscles in the hip and the outside of the thigh, they're working. They're under tension, but they're under tension with no change in length. So your hand was up, right?
Yeah, no, I have a comment. I don't know if it's too early to make that comment.
Sure.
Because I was going to try to tie in all of those fitness components, right? The fitness elements in a soccer training program. When do you do certain things, and why do you do it at that time of the year? When do you do strength training? You do that in the preseason. And then how much strength training do you do in the middle of the season or preseason?
Right.
Do you do that in the off season and so on, right? So in my head, I have a sort of a timeline. When you do all of that, like if you do strength training, you would do that early, I would think, in the preseason or even in the off season, obviously, right?
All right. So
you do a lot of that in the off season, and then in the preseason you do a little bit less or moderate, as you would say, and then in season you're just working on maintenance, right?
Right. So here's the way I would answer that, and then I think it can tie in even what Thomas said about when in the training. So first of all, the simplest answer about when to do it in training, my preference, because there's some people that do different things, but I prefer to do them at the end of the training, or if it's going to be done before, it's going to be done before, but with a little bit of time to recover. Like I don't really like doing strength training and then going straight onto the field. There are some coaches that like it, but then we're getting into that strength training isn't going to be with heavy weight or max. Like it's going to be a little lighter, and it's done for a different purpose. And so general rule, we're talking youth athletes here. We're talking the club, the academy, the amateur, or the youth environment. Okay, at the end of the practice is probably best, or it can be done in the morning or at some point right after school, and then they go train later, but there's a break. So that's the first thing. When, in terms of to incorporate in the season, like you said, Tony, or in the annual plan. Okay, first of all, most top level players right now, so they're doing strength training all the time. They're not, there's no time where they don't. The load overall, the volume, everything is definitely going to be the highest in the off season, and it's going to start to get lower in the preseason, and it's going to be much lower in season. So just as a simple example, in an off season, soccer players may be lifting weights 3 days a week. And by the time they get to the season, they might do it only once a week, and it might be every other week, and it might be, only if they don't play as much or whatever. So they always do it, but it's the attention that's spent on, the time that's spent on it. Okay, that's what periodization is. And then, of course, we have to understand that even if the volume is lower, sometimes the intensity can stay high. I did a YouTube video about this actually, where we talked about lifting weights in season in soccer. Okay, and the general consensus right now is that the best thing to do is to do high intensity, so relatively heavy lifting, but only once a week.
Right.
And sometimes it's tricky because you think about heavy lifting and it sounds like it's very hard. It is, but believe it or not, and I'll challenge anyone to, to go to the gym and try this. It's usually you get much more soreness and much more fatigue from doing 3 or 4 sets of 10, even though the weight might be lighter, than you do from doing 3 or 4 sets of 5. Okay, so just simple example. Let's say the maximum that you can bench press is 200 pounds. So if the maximum you can bench press is 200 pounds, maybe the maximum that you can do for 5 repetitions is 175 pounds. And maybe the maximum you can do for 10 repetitions is 150 pounds, let's say. Okay, so I would tell you that for sure, if you did 4 sets of 10 repetitions with 150 pounds, you would be much more sore the next day than if you did 5 sets of 5 repetitions with 175 pounds. And a lot of that has to do with the volume, the number of reps. The more repetition, the more volume, the more load, the more recovery you need. So the basic idea in season, yes, you do strength training, but the best recommendation from the top people in the world right now is high weight, low repetition, low volume, and only once a week. So anyway, hope that answers the question. So we'll, I know we're past 3 o'clock, and I do want to be conscious of time. We don't want to go too much over, but we're going to look at a few more videos and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, upper body power. Again, I'm going to go to find the video here. So this is again someone that you know very well, but we have to see the video to see what we're looking at here. And I want you, when you watch this, guys, I want you to think about the difference between this push-up and the other one. So let's watch a few of them. Hope we can all see that. Okay, all right. So, oh, yeah, maybe we'll. Well, okay, we'll leave that. We'll leave that there, and can't get here. Strange. This video player is very finicky here, but anyway, if you saw that push-up, okay, what was the what?
Are you showing off there, Richard?
Yeah. I don't have videos of anybody else, unfortunately. That's the problem. So what's the velocity of that movement, Tony?
Well, it's pretty quick. It's fast.
It's pretty fast, right?
Compared to the other one before.
Much faster, right? So what's the quality that's being trained there then, would you say? Strength or power?
Power.
For sure.
Yeah.
And this is a simple way to build power in the upper body. Now, I was still at that time, that's already almost 10 years ago now, but I was still strong enough to be able to get one clap and go back down. I mean, there are people that maybe that's too easy for them. Maybe they need to clap their hands twice, or they can clap their hands over their head or whatever, right? So again, you have to overload. If you're working with someone that's super strong, maybe a male athletes that are 20, 25 years old, this might even be not challenging enough for them. Okay, they might need something else, but in any case, and then there may be others that can't do it this way, and maybe they have to go on their knees and whatever. So you have to be picky about this, but yes, that's power, because the velocity, right? The force is still high. You're still doing a push-up, but the velocity was higher. If you look at how quickly my arms are moving, I think I've got it on the screen here again. Look how quickly, right? Okay, so you can't get off the ground without producing a little bit of power there. Okay, so that's the idea there. Okay, so now we're going to look at just one example here, okay, of lower body power. Okay, should be playing now. I'm just going to get to the point in the exercise here that I want to get to. All right, And yeah, this is, I think I was still in university when I made this video. So again, you know, you cannot comment on the length of my hair here, but you're going to see it. Here it is. Okay. And we're going to watch the jump here. All right. So we'll keep it on the screen here, and, you know, maybe we can even take a look at, so first of all, we're calling this power. Anybody knows why? Why are we calling it power and not strength?
Well, it's a continuous exercise, and it's done at a certain speed.
Right. It's really the velocity, right?
Yeah.
So that, you know, in order to make that jump, like, you can't do it without moving fast. It's not a sprint. It's still a jump. There's still forces involved, right? Okay. But it's done quickly. This is plyometrics too. Okay. And again, if you just kind of watch the landings, I'll show it again, you know, and relatively speaking, are those landings slow or fast? They're pretty fast, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's the other thing to keep in mind. Okay. Someone's in the chat here, right? Yeah, plyometrics. Yeah. So you know, the idea with these types of jumps, right? And we'll watch it from the side there. You can see a pretty good view there, right? Okay. All right. So if you're producing power in a repeated jumping movement and you're focusing on a quick landing, then of course, you know, that's what plyometrics is. It's nothing fancy. It's just repeated jumping with a focus on a fast landing. Okay. And again, what distinguishes this type of exercise from strength training is simply that the velocity of the movement here is high. It has to be. You can't build power without high velocity. Dave has sent a YouTube video. Okay, I don't know. maybe I'll take a look at that one after. Okay, so maybe Dave can comment who's in that video, because we just have a couple more things to show here, and then we're done. So we talked about strength, we talked about power, and we've seen now examples of high velocity and low velocity movements. We've seen eccentric, we've seen concentric. Okay, now we're going to kind of finish just by looking at some more specific exercises. And these, okay, which I'm going to show now. And I have some time, video times that I'm going to try to fast forward to, so we don't take too long with it. Okay. Okay. All right. So first of all, we're looking at a partner exercise, which is maybe can be considered a little bit more specific. And this partner exercise is done to train strength. So let's take a look. There are two examples from the same NSCAC coach clinic. This is a clinic that we did back, you know, again, before COVID, when we used to do this stuff. Okay. And here it is. So this is, we're calling this strength with a partner exercise. Okay. So I did that, and then we had them try against each other, right? So they worked in intervals of about 30 seconds at a time. All right, so why are we calling this specific strength? I mean, obviously we know that soccer players don't go crawl on the ground and, you know, try to knock each other down. But is there anything about this that's maybe a little bit more specific than a push-up, let's say? A little more relevant to soccer, maybe. What do you think, Tony?
Yeah, well, there is definitely, it's not it's different than a push-up. So of course, you're always changing. You're changing the intensity a little bit as well.
Yeah, maybe could you also say, I mean, it's kind of like a 1v1, right? Like there's,
yeah.
So you're not just going up and down, you know, you're reacting to what someone else is doing, you're moving in different directions. And, you know, I don't know, there's a comment here, but yeah, core movement. Yeah. So you're training the upper body. This, if you try this exercise, you'll see that it's actually really tough on the core and the hips as well. It's a good, almost a total body exercise. And you know, yeah, kids like it. It's fun. It's something that you know, there's a competition to it. If you saw, basically, you know, the idea is that if you can trip them, you know, pull on their hand to make them lose their balance, you score a point, right? So we put them in, and actually this is something that you know, it's used a lot with not just soccer. Wrestlers do this, like other athletes do this too. So it's one example, and then, you know, in the same video, then we have another example, which I believe is at about not 2 minutes. Not
Richard, that would be a great activity for goalkeepers, wouldn't it?
It is a very good one, yeah, because it gets them to try to build, you know, kind of their strength and quickness coming from that low position as well. Absolutely. Okay, so here in the same clinic towards the end, now we have another more specific example of strength. Okay, I want you to watch how I demonstrate it too. And by the way, we're inside here, inside a 5 meter by 5 meter square. Okay. So what I'm telling him there is I'm saying, so we're standing back to back in kind of a squat position, and within that square, that 5 by 5 square, I'm trying to get him out of the square. He's trying to get me out of the square. Okay, I hope that kind of makes sense to you. And let's watch it now. Okay, yeah. So this is, you know, a little bit easy for me because he's a lot smaller than I am, but okay. Okay. Yeah, and I don't know if in the video maybe we don't have the kids doing it. It's in another video, but okay. So again, do we see a little bit more specificity with that exercise, with that movement in terms of strength, right? Okay. Are we applying force against resistance? Absolutely. You know, if you have two players, right, they're matched more or less, they're on the same team. So there's some are going to be bigger and smaller. It's probably not going to look like this, but you know, they're both encountering resistance, right? There's force. What type of muscle action is this? And maybe Tony or anyone else in the chat.
Say that again, Richard. I'm sorry.
Are we working, are the muscles working concentrically, eccentrically, or isometrically in this action?
Well, you're moving, right? You're moving. I mean, I'm just trying to eliminate it.
Well, let's imagine that it's not that it's me against another adult, or that it's this player against another player his own size. He might not move that much, right?
Yeah, so it would be an ISO exercise.
Yeah,
right?
it's a bit of a combination. And then if the one person, and then again, you know, it's a little more relevant. This is not exactly what you do when you shield a ball, but it's pretty close. So it kind of gets them into that kind of, and you know, the other fun thing about this, which maybe you see it happen a little bit here. I mean, you know, obviously, you know, he moves, but you know, players, when they figure it out, you see how he kind of turns sideways, right? Because actually, with a lot of shielding exercises, there's leverage involved. So if you've got a force that's being applied straight onto you and you move a little to the side, what has to happen? The other person either changes or they fall. So this is, you know, this is kind of like the other one where there's, you know, there's some reaction to what the opponent is doing. It's a competition. It's fun for sure. I mean, again, in this particular video, this is just a highlight clip from the clinic. But, you know, guys, if you're members and you want to watch, you know, all of this stuff, it's all online and available to members and you can see it. Okay, Jeff is right. It's ISO for sure. For sure, there's a little bit of eccentric action, a little bit of everything. Okay, but it's more specific. So hope you enjoyed that one. And I'll finish just with one more. Okay, which is power. Okay, and we'll open it up, and I'll fast forward to the exercise here, which I think is at about 7 minutes in here. I'm just gonna find it. Okay, here. Okay, all right. So let me explain the exercise as we share it here, so you can see, and you can kind of understand what you're watching rather than listening to me talk in the field. So the exercise is players are working in partners. One has a ball, one does not. The one without the ball, that's me in this case. I'm showing it. I'm on my back. Okay, so I'm telling him he has to throw it, and I have to watch. I can't move until the ball is in the air. But once the ball is in the air, I have to get up from my back and I have to catch the ball, but I have to catch the ball without my feet on the ground. Okay, so, you know, we work together here. Let's watch him throw it. Okay, and we'll see what happens here. Right? So one on the ground, one in the air. Yeah, watch. All right. Okay. So simple, right? Why am I calling this a power exercise? What's different about this than the strength exercise?
Well, you need to get up, we talk about speed and velocity, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm older there, but you can still see that the movement getting up off, and not just up, but up and then jumping, right? So there's almost two kind of explosive movements that happen there. The first explosive movement, right, is getting up off the ground. Okay. And the second one, so you got to get up and then you got to jump, right? So again, nothing complicated here, really. And it's a fun one for kids because they get, and then you can start to tell them, don't throw the ball that high. Because if they really whip it in the air, then there's lots of time. But if they throw it only, whatever, only 10 feet in the air or something like that, then it's harder. And then we had all kinds of progressions to this. You can see in the clinic, right? We had all kinds of progressions where, for example, we would say, okay, you have to jump and catch it in the air, but you have to jump and spin. Or you have to jump off one leg, things like that, right? So it's not, again, that, like if we talk about specificity versus predictability, well, it's less predictable this way. There's, more variation. It's a little bit more specific though, a little bit more relevant to what you have to do in a game. Doesn't mean that in a game you lie down on your back and you jump up. We all know that you don't do that. It's good for goalkeepers for sure. It's actually very, very specific for goalkeepers. But for outfield players, it's not as specific, but it's more specific than just doing just the bounding and the jumps. Okay, yeah. Jairo says you have to get up fast and then jump. Yeah, it's two powerful movements, two movements which involve force applied at a high velocity. So we'll leave it there, and we're going to go back to the presentation because we're getting up on 3:30 now. I think we should finish, right? Everybody needs to get on with their day. Okay, but I hope those videos were helpful, right? I mean, it's a lot of information that we're cramming into an hour and a half here. So let's conclude. Okay. These are the questions that you have to ask yourself when you're planning training for strength and power. First of all, do you have the right resistance? How do you know that the resistance is appropriate? Well, it means that the exercise is challenging. For strength, it means it has to be hard to do 8 to 10 repetitions. If it's not, add resistance. You figure it out, right? Okay. If it's power, 6 to 8 repetitions. Okay. Do they target the total body muscles? I showed examples, upper, core, lower. You have to train everything because in soccer, we use all our muscles. We don't just use one area. Okay. Have you incorporated concentric, eccentric, and isotonic or isometric actions? You need all three. Okay. Do the power exercises have the right resistance and velocity? If you want to train for power, we showed jumping, bounding, clap, push-ups, whatever. You need a high velocity. Is there specificity? Hey, you don't need specificity all the time, but you do need it some of the time. Okay. And remember, you may trade off predictability, but that's the way it goes. Do you have appropriate volume, right? Remember, we talked about for strength, 4 to 6 exercises, 3 to 4 sets, 10 repetitions, 1 to 1.5 minutes of rest. And for power, 2 to 3 exercises, 2 to 4 sets, 6 to 8 repetitions, and again, a similar amount of rest between sets. So there you go. Again, I don't know if there are any questions at the end. I know, yeah, it's almost 3:30, so we can't stay on here forever. But thank you, of course. And if you have questions, please type them in the chat now. And I'm going to remind you again, everyone will get an email. So next week we'll get an email, reminding everyone of the the awesome discount that we're providing to you if you're interested for your club, academy, anywhere in Canada. We can set up the course at a 33%, 1/3 off. I'll come and deliver the course to you and your coaches, and you can get clubs and groups together if you want. All I need is just a venue with a projector and a small field, and we're good to go. Please feel free. And of course, we will also get all the the videos and everything from this one up and running. We wanted to wait till it was finished before we did them. Here are some questions now. Oh, just thank you. All right, everyone's saying thank you. Hey, you're welcome. Thank you for your attention, of course. Jeff, of course, you're welcome. All right. We'll leave it for another maybe minute or so, Tony, in case anyone else has any questions, but I see everyone just in the chat. Thank you very much. All right. Appreciate it. Dave, I'm going to take a look at that link you sent. Don't know if it was a link to one of our videos or, but yeah. All right. Maybe we're good to go to wrap it up then, eh, Tony?
Yeah, we could. I think, Richard, the one thing that, just to sum it up, perhaps, is that all of this energy systems, the strength and the aerobic and anaerobic, I think there is a specific time, when you do them, where you build up, right? So a lot of this strength training is done in the off season. Am I right?
Well, yeah. I mean, we talked about that, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So the total, like in the off season, you may have players doing 2 or 3 or even 4 days a week of strength training, right?
Strength. The same with the
aerobic volume
system
is much higher. Yeah.
The same with the aerobic system. You do that in the off season, right?
Yeah.
And then you build it up slowly. A power training. You could also do that in early in this, somewhere in between the off season and the preseason, late preseason, right? Would you, or you just do strength and power training at the same time, basically?
It's a good question. So really, and this speaks to periodization, and I'll be a little quick with it, but just so we understand, in a good periodized plan, what happens is at some point in the off season, the focus is more on strength. So there's only a few days where you even do any power exercises at all.
Right.
And then 3 weeks later, in a new phase, the focus can be more on power. It's still in the off season.
Right.
And then in another, if you have that much time, depends on how much time. Some soccer players at the top level only have about a month off, right? But depending. In Canada, we have a huge off season, so we have lots of time, right? Then you might have another 3-week phase where you're focusing more on speed or endurance or whatever, right? So it kind of shifts that way. But the basic idea, whatever it is, strength or power, much more of it is done in the off season than is done in the preseason or in season. And more is done in the preseason than in the in-season, but you still do exercises for strength and power in season. If you don't, what's going to happen is the players will start to get weaker, and then their risk of injury goes up. So it's important to keep that in mind, right? That you don't just stop.
Richard, as always, you gave me a headache.
Yeah, good. I've done my job then.
No, lots to think about.
Right.
And I mean, I appreciate it, and I've learned a lot from you, and I keep learning every time I speak with you. So thank you again. I just want to remind everyone that's still with us. We're working on offering these webinars, more of these webinars. I'm working on playing from the back. Which one I'm talking about, Richard?
Yep.
It's a long one, and so when it's all done, it will be a 3-part series, playing from the back, and we'll talk about building from the back before the new goal kick rule was introduced. We're going to talk about the 3-man build-up, the 3rd-man concept, the 2-4-2-2 build-up structure, the technical requirements, and a whole bunch of training sessions, so you can use it with your team. And there will be other webinars, but I feel like I'm on TV and I am, asking for, when they ask for money, right? We're not asking for money. We're just asking you to become a member of NSCAC, and so we can continue to do this. And the more I say it, the more I feel like I'm I feel like
you're in a telethon or something.
Yeah, on a telethon or something. But
right. Yeah. Well, just support us, by being a member, and you get all this exclusive content, right? That you don't get anywhere else. And we've got lots more plans. As Tony said, he's got his, mini course coming up. We've got in the summer some other live events where there's some top coaches from Europe, and we're building, working to build towards another convention next year, bringing some more top coaches from around the world. So stay tuned, and yeah, Tony, you're welcome. I hope your headache will not last too long, and we'll
It's a
see
good one.
everyone
It's
soon.
a good
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Richard. Thank you,
Thanks, guys.
everyone.
All right. Bye.